In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Emerald Steel versus 3 top meta decks, and these are fairly competitive matches against good players. So I have, obviously on screen here, an Emerald Steel Mirror, a Sapphire Ruby, which is at the end of the video, and a Ruby Amethyst, which is the middle match here. So going first, being on the play in the Emerald Steel Mirror, in my opinion, didn't really represent all that much of a significant advantage in set 3, but in set 4, I think it really does matter who's on the play and who's on the draw, simply because you are a Bucky focused discard deck now, not necessarily like using like the Friar Tucks and things that would force discards. So being able to establish your threats first obviously matters a lot more with the Floodborn oriented characters. So for example, I can drop my Bucky first, I can drop my Diablo first, my opponent has to constantly react to what I'm doing. Now on the mulligan here, being on the play, I do think I made a mistake, and I realized it after the match started, and I was like, why did I do this? Because I put myself at risk of getting Ursula Deceivered, so should I have put back the Let the Storm Rage on? Conversely, I have a dilemma in, do I play Ursula Deceiver or Bucky on turn 2, right? Do I want to see the opponent's hand since I don't have a Diablo? They do have the 1-drop Diablo, so they can see my hand and they can know maybe what to play around. But yeah, the Diablo and the Ursula Deceiver probably represent good value in this matchup because you do want to be able to see their hand. But I think what I was going for here is I have the Bucky. I'm going to drop that over the Ursula Deceiver because their songs aren't really going to be too threatening unless they're on the sudden chills. Yes, I probably should not have kept the Let the Storm Rage on because that is the only Ursula Deceiver target, but because I play so many songs, I'm likely going to draw into another song anyway, so the opponent is either going to force a discard with Bucky or Ursula Deceiver at some point. They go for the Bucky route here, not going for Ursula Deceiver. Either they don't have it or they don't think the strength in my hand is that threatening, or excuse, the Let the Storm Rage on in my hand is that threatening. And the Bucky on turn 2 likely represents that they have a Floodborn to drop on turn 3, right? Either the Aladdin or the Diablo. In the end, I decide that going for the Ursula Deceiver route may not be the best choice because if the opponent knows my hand, my guess is on curve they might drop the Ursula Deceiver here to rip the Storm, which would mean that I wasted my turn 3 putting that Ursula Deceiver on board if my song was going to get ripped out of my hand, right? Now it does give the opponent an alternative line of play where now they say, okay, he inked his Ursula Deceiver of all, which means I don't need to play my Ursula Deceiver because he can't sing the Let the Storm Rage on now with anything currently on board. So it buys him an extra turn, for example. I could hard cast it, but that's really bad tempo loss. So you can see like the little intricacies of this match that you would kind of go back and forth with. It's kind of difficult, but obviously I went for the double Bucky line here into the Diablo. You see the opponent discard a Strength, which indicates to me they have either a Sudden Chill or a Let the Storm Rage on, but they know I had the Ursula Deceiver from my opening hand with the Diablo, so they had multiple songs that they kept in hand because they did want to go the route of using the Ursula Deceiver of all. Here you can see them triggering the Sudden Chill, which is unfortunate, and what is really risky here for me is if they have a Floodborn, I would lose my Jafar, because this is the card I wanted to play next turn on curve to force the double discard. But they hard cast the Let the Storm Rage on, which takes out my Diablo, which is, you know, pretty good. Now I don't have that extra draw engine, but they're tapped out now. And if I am able to drop this Jafar, I don't even need an Inkable because I already have 4 ink. I am going to be able to discard both the cards in their hand. So I think they didn't ink last turn. I don't know if they thought maybe I just, on my single card left, I didn't have the Floodborn. But yeah, they could have inked that hidden Cove, and they could have inked that Strength. I can understand why they want to keep the Strength, because they could double sing it with Ursula next turn if I drop a big threat, but the only big threats I'm dropping are Floodborns, right? So in hindsight, like, you would probably want to ink one of those so that I didn't make you double discard off the Bucky. Again, they probably thought I'm down to my last card, like, what's the odds that it's a Floodborn, I guess. But I do draw for turn still, and you do play a lot of Floodborns in this deck. They're playing the mirror, they should know. So the odds I was going to draw into something playable was pretty high. I guess, you know, if they think I'm on Tinkerbells, Robin Hood's, Beasts, I'm still 1 ink off of those as well, which would put me in a difficult situation. So yeah, that is a consideration to make. So I don't know if the opponent necessarily made a big misplay there, but I do think it was still a misstep, not inking. Regardless, I didn't end up attacking the Cove with my Jafar the first time, but when I put the Robin Hood on board, I follow up the next turn and taking out the Cove that way. We draw into a Strength here, and we're going to just hard cast it to take out the Ursula Deceiver of all. It's a little dicey because I don't want to keep the Strength, right? Because if they top deck a Floodborn, I discard it, but I want to be able to out the Diablo when they play it, when they eventually draw into it. So it's kind of like, what do I what do I do? I think you just have to, in this matchup, continually just put out your threats, right? Because this is the nature of discard. I kind of call it a suicide match, right? Discard into anything, not just a mirror match, but you're basically forcing you and your opponent into top deck mode. The goal of discard is that you keep them on so low resources that whatever they top deck is not going to be playable. They either have to ink it or it's an uninkable. You're keeping them on 3, 4, 5 ink, and they just can't play the top end of their deck, can't execute their game plan, right? And then you're either going to discard that card or force them to ink it. So, you know, you can kind of see this is kind of where we're at. We're both in top deck mode. The Buckies at this point don't really matter. The opponent opts to trade out my Jafar with their Ursula. So I got good value off that Jafar, you know, getting the double discard and then the draw 1 off taking out their Robin Hood. I guess they do have to kind of slow me down, right? And at this point, I'm like, yeah, let me just quest with all the Buckies. Which you could argue is a mistake because whatever they draw off this Diablo, when it's my turn and I start drawing, like, I can force them to discard if I top deck more Floodborns. So they're probably going to opt to crash into all of my Buckies here. So again, you can argue that it was a misplay questing with the Buckies, but I'd rather the opponent exert their stuff and trade out because at this point, I think this Robin Hood can clutch the game out for me. So, and plus I still have top decks, right? So whatever I top deck, I'm just going to throw on board in a ready state and take out whatever the opponent has. So I'm cleaning up their board a little bit with the Robin Hood here. Go to 14 lore, and unless they want to crash their Diablo and lose their Diablo and then crash the Jafar, which wouldn't take out the Jafar, but the Jafar would get the draw 1 and then we would get the draw 1, like this Robin Hood being exerted is fine. We quest with the Pegasus because, yeah, if the Diablo wants to take out the Pegasus, that's fine, which they do. We still have game on board because they can't out the Robin Hood at the same time. So nothing the opponent can really do in this situation was gonna claw them back into this match. We draw a Bruno, which is strong here, but again, we just have game on board, so we just quest out for the victory, and that is the mirror match. Next up, we're going up against Ruby Amethyst on the draw, and this is, in my opinion, one of the best matchups for Emerald Steel discard, simply because the Ruby Amethyst curve is probably too slow to really do anything against an aggressive discard. And if you do get a nice curve, basically just Bucky into 1 or 2 Floodborns, it's usually going to be enough to slow them down where they can't generate enough ink to play their top end, like I was mentioning in that first match, and you likely just close out the match from there. What really makes Emerald Steel discard unfair for this format, in my opinion, and something that I don't know if they need to introduce a forbidden and limited list in Lorcana, but there's a line of play with this deck that is virtually unbeatable. Like maybe Sapphire Steel can come back from this opening, but I draw the 1-drop Diablo here. So I'm going to end up inking the 1-drop Pegasus, drop the Diablo, take a look at their hand. Okay, they got double card draw in the Maleficent, a Flynn Rider, a Madam M Fox, and then a tech option in the Shere Khan, which is a decent way to generate lore very fast with the Flynn Rider and stuff, right? They can challenge stuff out and close the game out very quickly, which normally you would think, you know, should bode well for a deck like this in a format that's fast. But the problem is with Emerald Steel discard is just our discard is faster than you can generate any kind of game plan with Ruby Amethyst. Like if the Emerald Steel discard player doesn't play nicely on curve, or doesn't really get like a good hand, like it doesn't have to be an optimal hand, it can just be like it has to be like a very suboptimal hand for the Emerald Steel player. If the Ruby Amethyst player can get a Queen's Castle up on board and like get some card draw off of it and lore gain, obviously that's one way I think that they can definitely win out the match. But this kind of curve is almost impossible to come back from, in my opinion. So we offset the Flynn Rider lore gain because of the Diablo being a 2/2 body shift. We shifted for free, so we trigger the Bucky after dropping that on turn 2 as well. And we're going to be able to either quest or sing Let the Storm Rage On. I'm not going to sing Let the Storm Rage On right now because the Flynn Rider isn't threatening me for anything. I know the opponent's hand from the 1-drop Diablo. Like, this is just really, really overpowered. The opponent discards a friend on the other side, which I guess makes sense considering it's a song and they don't have anything to sing it with right now, and they're at risk of losing it if I have an Ursula Deceiver up on the following turns, right? We know they have double Maleficent, I think. I don't remember if they inked one there. Maybe they did. The Shere Khan and so they inked the Shere Khan here and the Madam Mim. They top deck a Brawl, which is actually really good. So they out the Diablo, which prevents me from getting all the advantage off the card draw, which in and of itself, like, forget the fact that the shift Floodborn forcing the discard is insanely powerful. The fact that you would continually draw off the Diablo 2 is just ridiculously powerful. So we don't draw a Floodborn to trigger Bucky on turn 3, despite us, shifting the Diablo. We do drop the Ursula Deceiver, and we do have this Let the Storm Rage On to combo whatever the opponent might want to take out here. They drop the Madam M Fox and they have no target to rush, which is fine. But will they end up inking the Minnie Mouse or inking something else and trying to replay the Minnie Mouse? And this is the dilemma that Ruby Amethyst is often going to be in. It's like, do you just try to force your hand out on board so that there's less to discard, or do you try to generate, or do you try to like card advantage your way through the discard? Because, you know, the Bucky discard, to be fair, right, you're discarding one a turn. But as I mentioned in previous videos, Lorcana is a game where every turn you're losing resources because you're inking and then you're playing a card, but you're only drawing one, right? So when your opponent is forcing you to discard cards, like, you're just losing so much extra advantage there. And here you can see us double singing Let the Storm Rage On, drawing 2 and taking out the Mim Fox, which again offsets the Flynn Rider. And even if they were to trigger the Flynn Rider and gain 3, like, the state of the game is in such a place where that wouldn't really impact us too much anyways. We have another Let the Storm Rage On, and if the opponent doesn't double crash their 2 characters on board, which would cause them to lose their Flynn Rider here, this Ursula Deceiver of all is just going to annihilate the opponent's board once again. And this is why Emerald Steel is so powerful, right? Is like, you keep them low on ink, you keep them low on resources, and then that means that all of your Steel songs are just that much more powerful now, because the opponent can only play these smaller characters. They're forced to ink some of their bigger threats if they're even inkable, and if they're not, they're stuck in their hand, which we discard. But we're able to take out 2 cards. Like, look how broken this interaction continues to be. Take out 2 cards with Let the Storm Rage On, draw 2 cards, and it's just like, you know, board presence all hours, card advantage all hours. You know, it's an impossible situation for the opponent to come back from with Ruby Amethyst, because you would really rely on a Be Prepared board wipe here, but even a top-decked Queen's Castle or something wouldn't do anything. They're going to end up taking out the Ursula Deceiver, and I think, okay, they top-deck a Chernobog Followers, which again would normally represent something half-decent because they can banish it during their turn to draw, but if I have a Diablo up, which, you know, I just happen to draw another one there, it's just such a stupid deck. Emerald Steel, like, it really shouldn't exist. Yeah, so just board wipe them again. Quest with Beast, because even if they top deck a Maui here, they can't play it because they're only on 4 ink. So the game is over, right? The game was over on turn 2 when I dropped Bucky and Shift Diablo, to be honest. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that this deck is doing what it's doing in the metagame. Like, draw cards off Beast, draw cards off Diablo. It's like, what else is there to say here, guys? Like, this is... If there's one reason not to play Ruby Amethyst, unfortunately, I would say this might be one of them, because if you're in a situation like this, like, there's nothing you can do. And if you're thinking about, like, playing it at a big tournament where it's the best of 2 format, like, if you're if you're against the Emerald Steel player and they do draw the nuts on you, like, which would happen in this match, whether you're on the play or on the draw, like, it's almost impossible to come back from. So just the fact that Emerald Steel has some of these very powerful lines of play and they're able to aggressively mulligan for them makes the matchup so bad. So here, it doesn't matter what they top deck, we got a Bruno, and we'll probably draw into another song, which we do there in the Strength of the Raging Fire. And once the opponent sees this come down, I think they just end up scooping, because, like, it's so demoralizing. Like, what are you supposed to do in this situation, right? So that's going to wrap up this match. Let's go on to the Sapphire Ruby and see if they can fare any better. The final matchup that I want to review is another meta classic right now for set 4, and that is Ruby Sapphire versus Emerald Steel. So we are on the draw, but I really think that this matchup really depends on who sees the core of their engine first, and I'm calling Hiram a core part of the Ruby Sapphire engine because it really is one of their only draw engines in the deck. Yes, they have a lot of scrying cards, but it's just the Popsicles and the Grammatalas, the How Far All Goes, they're just not enough to keep pace with the discard. On the draw, we do end up drawing into the Bucky, and the reason why Emerald Steel should still be slightly favored in this matchup is because your Bucky comes out on turn 2, and the Ruby Sapphire player, they need to basically see Popsicle turn 1 on the play into a 1 jump ahead, because they can play that before you Ursula Deceiver it out of their hand, and then on turn 3 see Hiram. So that's a very specific combination of cards, basically just the 1 jump and the Hiram in order to get a Hiram out on turn 3. Getting it out on turn 4 isn't necessarily the worst, but here without the 1 jump ramp, the opponent is definitely going to be hurting, and now we have the advantage. We only need to see a Bucky and then any number of Floodborns in our deck combo with that, which is why this deck is a little bit stronger, whereas the opponent can see any item with 1 of 4 Hirams, right? So 1 of 4 Buckies, 1 of 4 Hirams. But again, the Bucky comes online faster, and it's really not able to be interacted with right now. until much later on. Like the opponent basically needs Shift Sisu, I think is the earliest opportunity they can basically deal with the Bucky. On turn 3, my opponent stops the Robin Hood Shift, or the potential of it, even though we didn't have it, by brawling away the Robin Hood there, which is really good value for me. If they don't have any other turn 3 play, mainly just playing a Fishbone Quill, right? If they don't have the 1 jump to play a 4 cost card on turn 3, they're really suffering there. And having them use the Brawl on that Robin Hood actually represents great value for me, because now I can play either the Diablo, well, I guess, yeah, the Aladdin wouldn't be affected by the Brawl without an ice block, but the Diablo, unless the opponent has another Brawl, is going to be able to come down here and put in some work. Now, looking back at this match, I think this was actually a misplay. I should have dropped the Aladdin here, not the Diablo, because I'm not necessarily hurting for cards here, and I do have the Beast Tragic Hero ready to follow up with. I'd still get the discard off the Aladdin, but if the opponent did have a Hiram here, because they are on the play, right, so they're able to hit 4 ink before me, thankfully they didn't get any aggressive ramp, the Hiram would have another item to pop next turn on the quest, whereas if I would have played the Aladdin here, I at least could stop the second Popsicle from getting Hiramed and them drawing 4 cards, right? Because they draw 2 off of when they play the Hiram, and then my Aladdin would quest the next turn. So I drop Aladdin here instead of Jafar, because the opponent didn't put a character on board. They put a McDuck Manor, and I do think that this card, while it could be good in certain matchups, it's just not good into some of its worst matchups for Ruby Sapphire, which is like Emerald Steel. So I would not be playing McDuck Manor, but we know that this card has seen its way into the Sapphire deck from time to time, and it is going to generate the opponent a lot of lore, but my Diablo is just going to be able to chip away at it. So the opponent drops a Grammatala, and this is what really won me the game here, is them not seeing a Hiram, right? Again, 1 of 4 in the deck. What are the odds that you see it early? You're trying to scry for it, and at the time you do see it, it can get you back into the game, even if you're in kind of top deck mode. But you got to remember too, as the Emerald Steel player, you're going to have a lot of tools, because the Sapphire Ruby player isn't going to be discarding your hand. So the Emerald Steel player is going to have a lot of tools to deal with that hero once it drops. They're going to have their songs ready. They're going to have, well, they're going to try to do their best in order to out it before it quests, but they can challenge it if it does end up questing, or singing a song, right? And then with the Aladdins, you're going to see us really aggressively push the items out of rotation here. We're going to constantly banish those items to keep the the Ruby Sapphire player off those Hiram draws. And you've seen some of those some of the Emerald Steel lists from Chicago actually use 4 Aladdins, probably for this exact reason, and I would actually agree. In my list, I was playing 3, but I might even want to go to 4, because here I'm in total control of the match, right? We knew the opponent was going to trade out the Grammatala into the Aladdin there, but the Aladdin represents so much value in these item-based matchups, and I think for Emerald Steel, Sapphire Steel probably would give you the hardest matchup from what I've seen. And just being able to constantly deal with their items, hopefully, while discarding with the Bucky on field, just seems like it's stronger. So I probably would go to 4 Aladdins in this build moving forward. Because again, like, you have another lower cost Floodborn, like, what's the harm in that? And despite the opponent outing our Diablo, we do have the Beast, and we draw into yet another Diablo. This Madame Medusa isn't going to do enough. We're not going to waste the Bruno on it just yet, unless we want to. Okay, I guess we will waste the Bruno, because we're going to use Beast to take out the McDuck Manor, stop that lore gain. So we're going to do our best to, like, decimate the opponent's board here. Use Bruno on the Medusa to force the discard, and I've talked about this application for Bruno before, where it's basically a removal spell for Emerald once you've discarded their hand. Now my Beast is safe unless they top deck a Maui, which I'm not too worried about, and next turn I'm going to be able to just, keep control of the match and quest for game. The opponent, off of that Popsicle draw, realizes there's nothing they can do, and they end up scooping it up. On screen here is a deck list that I used for this deck, and one thing I will say, guys, is that I am refining the deck list constantly, so every little card may not be exact compared to what you see on screen here, but at the time of me making this video, this is the deck list that I used. But like I said, I'll probably go to 4 Floodborn Aladdins moving forward, and maybe just make some other small tweaks here and there. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, guys. It's a little bit of a longer one, almost 20 minutes, but hopefully gave you some good insights into the Emerald Steel deck, if that's what you're playing. It is very, very powerful still, but again, if the game goes a little bit longer and you don't have control of the game, Emerald Steel can really run out of gas very fast, so keep that in mind. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.